Most people in the Flint area know the name Ballenger. There's Ballenger Highway, one of the busiest roads in Genesee County, that leads to McLaren Hospital. There's the Ballenger Fieldhouse on the campus of C.S. Mott Community College. Then there's Ballenger Park on the west side of Flint. There's the Ballenger Speaker Series. That's one of the most prestigious lecture series in the state of Michigan. It's hosted guest speakers such as Spike Lee, William F. Buckley, Harry Belafonte, Peter Jennings, and many others. You might have played basketball or skated at Ballenger Park, which is located near the corner of Flushing and DuPont in Flint. You might have also went to Memorial Park near downtown Flint. As a Flint native, I must admit I liked all that was named Ballenger, especially the Fieldhouse at Mott College. It should be noted that Ballengers also helped found McLaren Hospital and other local institutions. But who is Ballenger? Who are they? Where'd they go? Why'd they leave all this Ballenger signage behind? Today my guest is William S. Ballenger III. He's from Flint, Michigan. Bill is a member of the family that greatly endowed the Flint area. Bill shares his family history, discusses growing up in Flint, talks about the history of Flint, and shares his memories of the late Charles Stewart Mott and his family. Bill will tell us the history, contributions, and philanthropy of his father and his grandfather and their many accomplishments. As for Bill, he's a former state senator, a state representative. He's also a former professor. For decades, Bill published the newsletter Inside Michigan Politics. It's a must-read publication for those interested in Michigan government. He has his own podcast as well as a radio program. He's a paid public speaker who has appeared before hundreds of groups across Michigan to share the trends, the latest developments, as well as his knowledge about Michigan.
Well, I'm glad to join you, Art. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Let's get right into it. Your family goes back about better in
Right. Well, look, my grandfather, who was born in 1866, the year after the Civil War, was a graduating student in an obscure business college in upstate New York when Whiting, who was the head of what was called the Flint Wagon in 1888, sent out a nationwide dragnet search for a bookkeeper for the Flint Wagon Works. This is like the Durant Dort carriage company. This is when the name, the vehicle city, really got started. It had nothing to do with automobiles. This was buggy for horse-drawn carriage. That's what they did. The Flint Wagon Works, Durant Dort Carriage Company. My grandfather, at the age of like 21, answered the call and came to Flint as a bookkeeper for the Flint Wagon Works in 1888. He actually was born and brought up in rural Cambridge City, Indiana, down near Richmond, Indiana, but he'd gone to this business college in upstate New York. So anyway, he comes to Flint all by himself. To make a long story short, 15 years later, approximately, maybe 17 years, the Flint Wagon Works became Buick Motor Company. And by that time, my grandfather had worked his way up to the point where he was the first treasurer of Buick. In 1906, he was one of the original investors with Billy Durant in forming General Motors. He then went on, this is my grandfather, to be the first treasurer of Chevrolet when it was created in 1911. He retired in 1926. He was 60 years old. He spent the rest of his life as a kind of real estate dabbler, an investor, and a philanthropist. He provided the money that created Ballenger Park and Memorial Park downtown, which was a memorial to his wife, my grandmother, Minnie Ballenger. He gave a lot of money to what was then Flint Junior College, now Mott Community College, and they named the field house in his honor, Ballenger Field House. He was also chairman of the board of what is now McLaren Hospital. It was Women's Hospital back in the day. They named the west side of Flint Highway Ballenger Highway after him because that's where McLaren broke ground for its new facility there in about 1950. My grandfather died in 1951 at the age of 84. My father, who was a vice president of Citizens Bank and on the board of directors, succeeding my grandfather, who'd been on the board of Citizens Bank for years, he picked up what my grandfather had created and he developed Ballenger Park, where they used to have ice skating, where everybody went in the winter. I meet people all the time in Flint who said, "Oh my God, I remember going to Ballenger Park, ice skating in the 50s," and so forth and so on. So that is a very short version of the history of the Ballenger family. And
I think it was, I can't remember if it was your dad, your grandfather was also on the Flint School Board.
He was, and I think that was his connection to what became Flint Junior College, because remember, Flint Junior College was kind of an appendage of the Flint School Board, eventually became Mott Community College years later after C.S. Mott ceded a lot of his private land in Applewood Estate in the college cultural development area in Flint to the college to use as a campus for Flint Junior College. So yes, my grandfather was on the Flint School Board, and my father subsequently in the 1950s was elected to the Flint School Board and served on the Flint School Board. I was born in 1941, just before Pearl Harbor, March 28th, 1941. I had three brothers and sisters, one brother, two sisters. We grew up on the southwest side of Flint, just off Miller Road, in what became Woodcroft Estates development area, residential development. In those days, there wasn't any Grand Blanc, the way it is today. It's unbelievable how Grand Blanc and its area has exploded. But at that time, if you were going to move away from the residential area in the college cultural development on East Court Street near Flint Junior College, you went over to the west side outside the city limits at that time in what is now Flint Township. They started Woodcroft Estates. I got to tell you, Art, out of all the people I grew up with at that time, I'm the last one left. Everybody else has gone. They've either long since moved away from Flint. Many of them moved away from Michigan entirely, or they are now deceased. And I have kept my old childhood home that I grew up in Flint, off Miller Road. That's where I'm talking to you from today. I also have a house in Lansing, so I kind of commute back and forth between Lansing and Flint every week.
Your family, your grandfather especially, he was quite a wise person and innovative philanthropy, because the things he did that is rather unique. The parks that you reference, Memorial Park and Ballenger Park, are parks that are private.
Exactly. But nobody knows it. They think it's part of the park system because they're open to the public, just the way city parks are. But you know what, Art? I think my grandfather must have detected, even at that early date, that there was something not quite right about Flint city government. And I don't think he wanted to just give his land to the city of Flint. He was afraid they would muck it up. So he created two private parks, Memorial Park and Ballenger Park, and he created a trust fund in the Citizens Bank, of which he was a director. So even today, the new version of Citizens Bank is Huntington Bank, which is based, believe it or not, in Buckeye Land, Columbus, Ohio. They bought First Merit Bank, had bought Citizens Bank. This all happened about 15 years ago. Huntington got first merit about 6-7 years ago. They have really spruced up Ballenger Park and Memorial Park as something I think you could be proud of today, although they are not as high tech, high level recreational as it was back in the glory days of the 1950s with the ice skating and the tennis courts and everything else. The only thing there is in both parks are basketball courts, as you can imagine, and they are heavily used by all the local kids. So that is the way Ballenger and Memorial operate today. You're absolutely right. They're private parks, but nobody knows.
But I remember as a kid, looking at that park, and I said, "There's something different about that place. It's got green grass, and it's got real grass." My park was all full of, because the landfill bubbles up over the metal and stone. You have a legacy, your name attached to it. One of the greatest field houses in the United States today, because it's the home of the crazy program at Mott College basketball.
Yeah, the Bears. Yeah, they've been great. Steve Schmidt, the coach, been a world-class coach, and they've won national championships. They've really done the job until the pandemic.
Mott College is blessed because of your family. Your family has touched Mott College. Some have wrote that we were able to keep such great because of your family endowment and legacy years.
Another thing that my grandfather left was funding for a lecture series, which over the years, I would argue, is almost the best lecture series in the entire state. I mean, they've had world-class people. They've had Werner von Braun. They've had former British Prime Minister Harold Wilson. They've had Lech Walesa. They're having a program coming up on April 1st with John Quinones, who's an ABC correspondent, who's got his own show. So that continued all this time. That began just after my grandfather died.
Well, you missed one.
Okay.
Spike Lee.
Spike Lee was definitely a speaker. I met Spike Lee. There were, Patti Smith came.
But your family, anyway, has touched a lot of lives. When you look at all the things that have been done over by the auto pioneers who left money in Charles Mott, Flint's been blessed in ways that most cities in America hasn't.
Yeah, a lot of people do not realize with all the terrible news there has been about Flint over the last couple of decades, even before the Flint water crisis. I mean, Flint has gotten such a bad rap nationally, and it is viewed as just the pits, the urban, quagmire, the worst of any medium-sized to large American city. But a lot of people don't realize that the early auto barons, so to speak, whether they were Mott, Ballenger, Whiting, Bauer, Sloan, all these people, they gave a lot of money to create a college and cultural development, which has Whiting Auditorium, which has the Sloan Museum of automotive history, the Flint Institute of Music, and the Flint Institute of Arts. And the Flint Institute of Arts is a world-class art museum. It's certainly the best art museum and the biggest in Michigan outside of the Detroit Institute of Arts. But guess what? The Detroit Institute of Arts for years was owned by the city. It wasn't a private, entity at all. You could say that as a private art, the Flint Institute of Arts was the very best and the biggest in the entire state. And it's bigger and better than ever right now. I'll just mention the Longway Planetarium is also there. That's also part of it. It's a jewel. The Cultural Center in Flint is the biggest and best of its kind in any city in Michigan, and better than most in the United States.
You went to Zimmerman.
Right, exactly. I went to Zimmerman, which was on and still is today on Corunna Road. And my brother and sisters went there too. Everybody went to the public schools. My next door neighbors here in Flint growing up were Harding Mott, the son of C.S. Mott and his family, Zimmerman Junior High School, which, by the way, was in one building in kindergarten and ninth grade. You can go all 10 years in one place. It was only 5 blocks from our house. We walked to school or rode our bikes every single day for 10 years. Compare that to what's happened to the Flint school system today. It's tragic. The Flint school system is no more as it existed back then. Which junior high did you go to, or which high?
I was going to tell you I'm a McKinley Falcon.
Oh, yeah, McKinley. We had, McKinley, Longfellow, Lowell, Emerson, Whittier, and Zimmerman. They were the 6 public junior high schools, 7th, 8th, and 9th. We didn't have middle schools in those days. I still think junior high schools were the best way to go. Go K6 and then go junior high 7 through 9 with those 6 schools that I just mentioned. And we had intense rivalries. Remember the basketball games every winter?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Home and away for each school. It was really something. And some incredible athletes came out of those schools.
I went to Freeman Elementary School,
Yeah.
just a few blocks from named after Ralph Freeman.
Right.
Did you know him? Did you know Ralph Freeman?
I didn't know him personally, but, I certainly knew the family. I knew who he was. Yes, absolutely.
Well, they named the school after him. Ralph Freeman was the prosecuting attorney in Genesee County at one point. You were privileged to go to so many great Princeton.
Between Zimmerman and Princeton, I went to a private secondary school in New Jersey called Lawrenceville, which is a very great school. 3rd biggest prep school in the country, all male at the time. Now, obviously, like almost all of these schools, co-ed. And I'm class secretary for the class of 1958 at the Lawrenceville school right now. And then I went to Princeton, and I was in the class of 62.
Yes, and then you went on to Harvard.
Well, I didn't go right away. Actually, I did quite a bit between the time I graduated from Princeton in 62. I got my Master's of Public Administration from the Kennedy School at Harvard in 1977, 15 years later.
Oh, wow.
In between.
After that, somehow, after you got through school, ended up, I'm not sure when you got out of.
2 of the first 3 years I spent in Europe. But I worked in some time as a newspaper reporter at Evansville, Indiana, down on the Ohio River, the Evansville Press. I was also a freelance writer. Then I was hired let me tell you about Evansville. A lot of people don't know. They've got one of the most colorful nicknames of any college in the country, the Purple Aces. And guess who was a member of their basketball team when I was a reporter down there? Jerry Sloan.
Oh, my gosh.
Who went on to be a great player with the Chicago Bulls and then a great head coach with the Utah Jazz. He recently passed away, but a very famous guy. And a lot of people don't realize that Jerry Sloan was the original Evansville Purple Ace.
You escaped Indiana basketball country. Somehow you made it back to Michigan, and you got a hankering to run for public office.
Well, I started working for Ellie Peterson, the Republican State Central Committee, as a research director and a public relations person. I was living in a farmhouse in rural Ovid, O-V-I-D, in western Shiawassee County, which is, as everybody who ever went to Flint or is from Flint knows, between Flint and Lansing. I ran for a vacant seat in the State House of Representatives in 1968. I was 27 years old. I was only 6 years out of college, and I'd spent 2 of those 6 years in Europe. And I was elected. So I served 1 2-year term in the House, 1969-70. Then there was a vacancy for the state Senate in 1970. I ran for that. I had no primary opponent in the Republican primary. It was a very Republican district. I then won the general election. I served 1 4-year term in the Senate. So I serve with a lot of the exotic characters that you know very well in the Democratic Party in particular. I served with Coleman Young. Coleman Young was the Democratic floor leader, and I served on the House Press Committee with Coleman Young. I knew Coleman Young very well.
Coleman Young was a character. If you ever got him privately to talk to him, you could quickly see why he got to be wherever he was, because he had some skills.
Absolutely. Oh, he was incredible. he really ran the Democratic Party in the Senate because the minority leader, it was really interesting. When I was in the Senate, believe it or not, it was a 1919 tie. And the only reason the Republicans controlled was because the Lieutenant Governor, Jim Brickley, was a Republican and he could break the tie, just like Kamala Harris could break ties in the U.S. Senate today. It's the same situation.
The one thing that I was most interested in is taking you back a little bit into the Wayback Machine. Republican Party during your era, there was a bit of factions growing that gave rise to this sort of ultra conservative bunch, which was led by John Engler.
Right. Yeah.
And I assume from watching you over many years that you were in a more moderate posture, more of a Bill Milliken type than a John Engler type.
I was definitely considered a Milliken moderate Republican. But let me tell you something you'll find interesting. You sat next to John Engler in law school and you got to know John Engler. Let me say that when John Engler was first elected to the state house in 1970, his district contained Montcalm County. That's where Greenville is, and a lot of small towns like Sheridan and Vestaburg and Edmore and Carson City and places that a lot of people don't know about. And that was in my Senate district. So John Engler and I overlapped. John Engler and I actually set up a district office in Greenville, and we alternated weeks going up to Greenville and sitting in the office to hear from constituents who wanted to come in and talk to us and everything else. And John Engler, who was a graduate of Beale City High School, west of Mount Pleasant in Isabella County, invited me to come up and give the commencement address to Beale City High School when I was a senator in 1971, I think it was, or 72. And he was in the house. And I remember going to the Engler farmhouse and having a big Engler family summer dinner, family dinner after the speech. Even though Engler, at that time, he was a little bit unformed in terms of his philosophy and ideology, he grew to be more conservative over time than Milliken was. And he eventually, by the late 1970s, became the face of the kind of anti-Milliken, if you want to call it that, wing of the Republican Party.
You left the Senate. Did you run for Congress at one point?
I ran for Congress, but I lost the primary to Cliff Taylor, who then was a lawyer in East Lansing. But Cliff Taylor then lost the general election to Bob Carr. And Bob Carr went on to be a congressman for a long time, with the exception of 2 years. He lasted for 20 years, all the way up to 1994. Cliff Taylor came back and ran against Bob Carr in 76. He lost again. Cliff Taylor actually ended up as Supreme Court Chief Justice because John Engler, who had become a very good friend of Cliff Taylor, appointed him originally to the Court of Appeals. From there, appointed him to the Supreme Court. Cliff Taylor actually was never elected to any office to which he had not originally been appointed. Okay, I mean, he never won a freestanding election without being an incumbent because he was appointed by Engler.
Well, let's come back to Flint. Your family has a long history in Flint, and there are a lot of people who I'm curious to know more about, if you know anything about. One of those is the only governor from Flint, Henry Crapo.
Well, now, I may be old, Art, but I'm not that old.
Are there any family stories about Henry Crapo that you can share with us?
No family stories about Henry Crapo. I mean, you're talking about a Civil War governor. He was a Civil War governor. But look, Art, let me just tell you. Remember, Crapo had a farm out in Swartz Creek area. You know, we all talk about Billy Durant, right? The founder of General Motors. Well, what was his middle name? His middle name was Crapo, William Crapo Durant. And Henry Crapo's physician, I think, was named Wilson. We did grow up over here in the Woodcroft Estates off Miller Road with Francis Wilson Thompson, who was a descendant of Crapo. So I knew Fran Thompson very well. But, if you're asking me about Henry Crapo, we're talking about the late 1860s after the Civil War. The only other governor from Flint was Bagold, Josiah Bagold, in the 1880s for one 2-year term. I think there have been only 2 governors from Genesee County, but I cannot tell you personal stories. My grandfather, 130 years ago, when he came to Flint in 1888, that was 20 years after Henry Crapo had been governor.
The Flint Golf Club has been a historical golf club in many ways and was founded by many of the people who founded General Motors. Do you have any Flint Golf Club stories for us?
Well, I can only tell you that the main mover and shaker was J. Dallas Dort, who was a mayor of Flint early in the 20th century. I mean, he was mayor around 1905, around the time Buick was formed, when my grandfather was treasurer of Buick and Bill Durant was fixing to organize General Motors. J. Dallas Dort was the one who really kind of picked out the property for the Flint Golf Club. At one time, they talked about creating the Flint Golf Club on ground which has ever since been Swartz Creek Golf Club, which is where this Woodcroft Estates development off Miller Road is sited. Many of the homes overlook Swartz Creek. And apparently Dallas Dort looked at that and he decided, I got a better deal over here on the east side. And so in I can't remember exactly when he did, because Dallas Dort unfortunately died relatively young in 1925. He was in his 50s, I think. And by that time, the golf club was up and firing on all cylinders. And at one time, I remember the PGA National Tournament was held one year at the Flint Golf Club.
Yeah, there was a tournament called the Carling Open.
And, yes, I remember that. Yeah,
it was sponsored by Leo Seide.
Yeah.
Who incidentally, he's of Jewish heritage, and he wasn't allowed to be part of that golf course at that time, but later was invited. Is a crazy story, but later was invited to become a member along Warren. Did a podcast, by the way. He tells the story. C.S. Mott. Do you have any memories of him?
Oh yeah, I have a lot of memories of C.S. Mott. First of all, I mentioned earlier, our next door neighbors here in Flint when I was growing up were C.S. Harding Mott, his son, C.S.'s son, their 2 children. And I was very good friends with Claire Mott, who became Claire Mott White. She married Bill White, who was later head of the Mott Foundation. And in the summer of 1951, believe it or not, Claire invited me down to the Mott estate on the island of Bermuda in the Atlantic Ocean, where C.S. Mott for years had a vacation home, and Harding and his wife Jerry and their 2 kids, Harding Jr. and Claire, spent summers. So I spent 5 weeks with the Motts in Bermuda when I was 10 years old. I knew C.S. Mott. He had a second family, a generation younger than the one he had by his first wife. A lot of people don't realize C.S. Mott was married 4 times, and he had 3 children by his first wife, and he had 3 children by his fourth wife, none by his second and third. The kids that were born to his fourth wife, Ruth Mott, were my age, either slightly younger or a little older. One of them was Mary Ann Mott, who is still alive. I was over very often, birthday parties at C.S. Mott's house on the east side, right near Flint Junior College, Mott Community College. Yes, I knew C.S. Mott. C.S. Mott was younger than my grandfather by about 12, 15 years. So he was a youngster born in the late 1870s or 1880, but he was quite old by the time I knew him. But he was still pretty hale and hearty, and he lived, right up until I think the early 1990s.
How would you describe him?
By that time, I mean, he had this incredible career, and he was a politician as well. He had been mayor of Flint. He actually ran for governor at one point, but, he was taciturn, somewhat aloof, a man of few words. I imagine when he was younger in his salad days, he was fairly loquacious, and he had to be verbally skilled to have done as well in so many respects, both in business and as a politician. You got to remember, I'm 5, 10, 15 years old. And when you meet this august figure like C.S. Mott, you don't expect to have great heart-to-heart, hail fellow, well-met conversations. You're deferential, you're kind of almost in awe when you meet somebody like that. But he had a presence. The Applewood estate, which is still very much extant, still going strong, at least before the pandemic, with tours periodically throughout the year by local citizens are able to come and go around the estate and the house and everything else. Really a fascinating story. I knew the Mott house inside and outside very well in those days.
He was a cool guy as far as I was concerned, because as kids, we used to see him down hanging around Kresge's at the lunch counter.
He was very humble, honestly. Late in life, the only car he had was a little Corvair. Yeah. And he loved this little Corvair. He was he was a man, he was parsimonious. He lived very humbly. He might be dressed in a 3-piece suit. He was very quiet, very humble, he wasn't an extravagant person in any way, shape, or form, the way he lived or the way he talked. He was looking to save a dime wherever he could at any time. There was an irony to it because he was a man of immense wealth, but he was nevertheless tight with his money.
Yeah, well, he's still giving. Well, Bill, I've got one other thing. Now, you're part of a trioca of pundits in Michigan that includes Jack Lessenberry, Skubic, yourself. Are there any pundits coming along after you?
Well, I don't know. Punditry seems to be dying out a little bit. Pundit is somebody who bloviates somewhat and is not shy about prognosticating and predicting. And that's what I did for many years. In fact, more than not only Skubic, but more than Jack Lessenberry. I mean, one of the things that the Inside Michigan Politics newsletter did that you subscribed to was we'd pick winners of races around the state for the legislature, even judgeships. As far as I know, we were the only publication of its kind, not only in Michigan, but maybe nationally. We would actually pick the winners and losers of every judicial race in Michigan, from the Supreme Court on down. And we even went into local prosecutors' races like Art Bush, versus Bob Weiss or whatever.
That was Kid White Shoes versus Black Bart.
Well, I'm saying, that's what a pundit does.
So I had to learn to be polite and nice to my vanquished opponent.
That must have been painful. That must have been painful.
Not for me.
Well, maybe not, but you probably rankled from the fact that you had to be more polite toward him than you would have liked to be. No, he was rescued. He was rescued from oblivion by the appointment of a judgeship. He's somewhat like Cliff Taylor.
Thank you, Bill Ballenger, for joining me. You're an amazing guy with a great memory. I've been a great supporter of mine.